Cate Blanchett is here since 1999 with her Oscar-nominated and Golden Globe-winning performance in Elizabeth. She has become one of Hollywood's most acclaimed actors, and she is certainly the busiest. Since the beginning of last year, she has completed 6 films. 3 are currently in theaters. They are The Shipping News, The Lord of the Rings, and Charlotte Gray. She's also just been nominated for the Golden Globe for Best Actress for her performance in Bandits. I am pleased to have her back on this program. Welcome.
Howdy.
Howdy. Yeah, Texas, Texas. Yeah. Your dad actually was from Texas, wasn't
Yes, yes, he was.
Yeah. And then met your mom in Australia, and they stayed there? Or?
Yeah, he was in the Navy, and his ship, he was coming from the Antarctic, where I think he decided he was going to be a Unitarian minister, and he met my mum, and that all changed.
Yeah.
So his ship broke down, and they met
And
their
you
dads.
grew up in Melbourne, or where?
Yeah, in Melbourne, and I went to drama school in Sydney.
In Sydney, yeah. And there was this wonderful story about you in Egypt, where you got they were making some movie.
Yeah, people keep talking about that. It was an
they
accident.
do?
It was an accident, really. I mean, they were going to pay 5 Egyptian pounds. I met someone, I was staying in this really dodgy place called the Oxford House, where they printed passports and money, and they were recruiting extras for this boxing film, and I thought, but it was so boring. It was deathly dull. I thought, if this is what filmmaking is, I don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah. And then what?
And then what? Well, I escaped university. I was doing economics and fine arts. Yeah, and I went travelling and decided I'd get into the visual arts from, I suppose, a management point of view. I could appreciate, but my skill is not great. I wish I was a painter, but I don't have the capacity. So I thought I was going to go into the visual arts in some way, and then I just kept doing theatre at university, and then auditioned to get into NIDA, because I thought, well, I have to sort of purge myself of this desire to perform. And I haven't been able to do that.
But there
yet.
was a desire to perform.
I think so. I'm quite perverse. If people ask me to do something, I sort of tend to go the opposite way. So because people were saying, you should do this, I was constantly running away from it, I think.
But why did you want to do it in the end? What was it that made it attractive?
I don't know what makes an actor want to act, and I think that changes, day to day, week to week, job to job, really.
You've been asked this a lot, I'm sure, now, because of all that those 3 films are out, Shipping News and Lord of the Rings, and also, what's the third one? Charlotte Gray, what we're going to talk about. But did it just happen?
It did. I think people are very cynical, and there's so many people carry a briefcase to work as actors, which I don't do. They map out, graph out their career trajectory, and I'm a huge believer in chance. You do, because the way I like to work is that you do all your work. I mean, in the research, that's the interesting bit for me. And then you get on, you meet the people, the director, the crew, and things happen in the moment. And I think I probably choose, or roles choose me, in a more random way. There's not a plan to it. And I think there are a lot of things that I was wanting to do for quite some time, and they just sort of happened.
Yeah, Shipping News is one.
Yeah, Lassiter just said come to Newfoundland for a week, which is what it was. And it was fantastic. And it was straight after Charlotte Gray.
Yeah, so. From a hero to one of the worst women you can imagine.
Yeah, and it's the diversity that I find interesting.
Yeah, let me talk about Charlotte Gray only because it's current. You had read the book.
Yes, I'd read it. It was the first of Sebastian Faulk's books that I'd read when I was in a production of Plenty.
David Hare.
Yeah,
right.
David Hare's Plenty on the West End with the Almeida Theatre. As preparation, because both Charlotte Gray and Susan Traherne were recruited by the Special Operations Executive to work with the French resistance during the Second World War. So the background was very similar, the character's very different. Susan Traherne's much more brittle than Charlotte, there's much more hope. And she's more immediately endearing, I think. But both of them sort of fail in a lot of ways and have a really heightened experience in the Second World War. So I'd sort of read it as research, and then Sebastian sent me the book and said if it was made into a film, he thought I'd be a great Charlotte, and then accost.
So he sent it not even before people were, certainly Gillian Armstrong wasn't involved at that time.
No, and I didn't read it with, a film in mind.
But he sent it to you and said...
Independently, there's chance, and then accost, independently of him, said that they sent me an early draft of the script and said that they'd secured the rights and would I be interested, and I jumped at the chance.
Yeah. It's an amazing story of a group of women who got involved and who were dropped into France and did these extraordinary things.
Yes, I think the
and where they came from and why they were motivated. And
the Second World War, and I think wartime in general, but particularly that war for women was, you know, an incredible turning point. And I was lucky enough to speak to a couple of women who had who worked with the SOE. One woman who was dropped in just outside Paris when she was 17, and her name was Rose. Because I read the manual that a man called MRD Foote wrote, and all the you know, the rules and regulations that agents are meant to adhere to.
But a lot of interesting things too, as I remember the manual, in terms of how you kill and how you do all those other kinds of things.
Absolutely.
And what you do if you've, you know,
and when a lipstick is not a lipstick, it's got your cyanide pill in it.
Right, exactly.
But meeting Rose, who, she broke all the rules. She fell in love with her contact. She free fell into France. She was enjoying the parachute drop so much that
she forgot to open?
Yeah, and it was, and so she absolutely liberated me to break all the rules, which Charlotte sort of does.
And why did she say she did it?
She didn't
Rose.
have an answer, because the opportunity was there. I think she's a daredevil. I mean, Billy Crudup, who's in the film also,
plays a resistance fighter who falls in love eventually.
I mean, Rose was, I think she's, what, must be 80 odd now.
Yeah.
She was flirting outrageously with Billy. Yeah, he was blushing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, you know, if I wasn't there, one thing could have led to another. She was quite an extraordinary spirit.
But doesn't sort of, just did it because it seemed like the thing to do.
And I do think that there was it was the last true fight, and it's certainly perceived that way historically. The way the Second World War, there's a clear sense of
black and white.
Good and wrong,
right.
which we don't sort of have in any war now because we know too much.
Yeah, but Charlotte did it in part because she's trying to find out about a lost love.
Yes, I think her reasons for going to France are incredibly impure, and that's what I love about her as a character.
That's her imperfection, is it? That's her flaw, that her reasons are not pure, or something else?
I think that she's there for the right and wrong reasons. I mean, gosh, is there ever a right reason for going into war? I don't know. Patriotism.
Well, sure, there's a right reason, I would think. I mean,
well, I mean, your sense of one's sense of what is right is not necessarily what the so-called enemy's sense of right is, and it's who the enemy is what, and the way the ground keeps shifting is what Charlotte Gray deals with.
She, what amazes me about you and her, I mean, there's a quality of almost distance about her, you know, a sense of almost aloneness. Did you find that in her?
Yes, I think that she's very isolated and very...
Isolated is better, yeah.
Very hidden from herself. And I mean, I think the paradox is that she becomes someone else, and in doing so actually finds out who she quintessentially is, you know, although that constantly...
And what does that mean?
Changes.
She finds out who she is, meaning, well, who does she find out she is?
Well, I think because, I mean, at base, I think Charlotte Gray is an epic love story, and I think it deals with a young woman falling in love, and that the various different forms of love, familial love, and you know, love of a lover, and love of children, and generational repair, and that it's through those relationships that she begins to find out who she is.
Roll tape. This is where. I think this is a conversation between you and Billy Crudup's father, who's played by the great Michael Gambon, and who was asking her who was she fighting for. Roll tape.
Your hands. It's always a shock the first time. I tell Julien he'll die fighting the Germans. The old man we remember.
You fought in...
I was an engineer. The war loves engineers. We mend dead machines.
Well, why doesn't your son live with you? You don't get on.
My son's a communist. You?
I'm not interested in politics.
And why fight? Why risk your life?
For your country.
Nobody fights for their country. They fight for their family, for someone they love.
Does it matter?
Depends if you're on our side.
I'm on your side.
Yes. I think you are.
The great Michael Gambon. Huh?
Yes, the very great Michael Gambon.
Yeah. The David Hare, you were in Plenty. Tell me about him.
David is a painfully honest human being, and I think that's what makes him an extraordinary writer, is he writes things that people don't necessarily want to hear, and I definitely think that about Plenty. And when it was on in the West End, it was you know, obviously they called it a revival because it hadn't been done since the original production, and I think that's because it was saying things about England and about English that the English didn't want to hear, and it did divide people. Some people hated it and some people loved it, and I think it was very hard for him putting it back on because there's a lot of him in Susan Traherne. Probably hate me for saying that, but
what do you think of him is in her?
I think, well, he's the sort of person when I saw him the other week. He actually came to see Charlotte Gray. I asked him to come along, and I asked him how he was, and he paused and he just said, "I am dreadful. I am shocking. I've had an awful year," and it was fantastic because most people would just say fine, you know. But you always know where you stand with David, and he can be very sharp, but he's also incredibly generous.
Okay, but what of him is in her?
I think it's a brittle quality.
The brittleness in the sense of honesty?
Yes, and I think that he's also...
Candidness.
Yes, he's very candid, and he's also very... his internal state manifests itself externally. So he can be very light and incredibly intense, and he's deeply intelligent, and I think he always does feel on the outside of things, or definitely when he was writing Plenty, because it's a young man's play. I don't think he would write that sort of thing now. So I think it was quite interesting for him to see it again.
I saw him on stage, and you said to me, he's always had an actor. He's always been an actor at heart.
Oh, yes, I think he's definitely a performer.
Yeah.
It was great. I really enjoyed Via Dolorosa, just watching David. It was interesting because I saw it, I think it was just after Plenty, and it sort of made sense of a lot of the way Susan theatricalizes her internal state, watching David perform. I sort of almost wish I'd seen it before.
Let me talk a little bit about Shipping News and Petal. A totally different character. This is to be admired, and Petal cannot be worse. Did you do it because you'd read Shipping News as well, or?
No, I'd never read the novel. I read it, obviously, after reading the script, and I read several versions of the script.
Yeah. Was this because of loss?
Yeah, and also it was just one of those things, you know, it's like you're talking to someone in a pub and they make a suggestion about where you're going to eat that night. You think, yeah, that's a great restaurant. It was one of those things. I met Lasse.
You saw the script and you knew he was directing. You said yes.
We happened to be staying in the same hotel, and I'd wanted to meet Lasse for quite some time. And he mentioned the Shipping News, and he said, you know, would I be free? And I said, yeah.
Just like that.
And he directed ABBA the movie. So how could you say no to a man who directed ABBA the movie? You can't. It's impossible.
But you have no qualm, which is interesting about you and good about you, and as to whether this is the starring role.
Oh,
you would go from playing this. Petal is over in 10 minutes.
I die on page 9, I think.
Down page 9 is pretty good. Yeah,
I did when I was preparing for The Gift, which I did with Sam Raimi. I was playing a psychic. I did meet a psychic who said, "Do the role where you die," and that crossed my mind. I thought, well, I die pretty quickly, but no, it doesn't interest me. And I think that it's very easy once you get known for a certain thing that it's about the size rather than the actual experience of doing it. And for me,
wait a minute, it's about the size.
The size of the role. I think people get obsessed with. Number of words, number of close-ups. Not obviously as as obviously as that, but for me, it's about the experience of doing it. And I think that when you play different roles, you exercise different muscles. You know, I don't deliberately choose small roles or big roles. It's just I thought, oh, I haven't done something like that before, and often you can't play someone as relentlessly obnoxious as Petal. In a larger
for a long, exactly. But is there any sense, thinking about all these things you have done in the last 2 or 3 years, does anybody say, stop it, quit working so hard?
You just did.
No? Does your husband say?
Well, but see, I mean, he works just as hard as I do. And it doesn't feel like, I think when things are happening organically, it doesn't feel like hard work. Yeah. Because you're
doing what you love.
Yes. I mean, I definitely felt tired at the end of Charlotte Gray.
Yeah. But, because of that experience? And
it was very intense. But I think it was just the role that I'd been on, and I suddenly thought, oh, wow, I've been working sort of solidly for for 18 months.
Well, did you rush right out and do Shipping News or not? Or had you
Pretty
already
much
done
the day after. But it was only a week.
Yeah, you can be
You
there for
know,
a
when
week.
you're running a marathon.
From the south of France to Newfoundland.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's the difference in the roles and the projects that makes that transition much more fluid and easier.
You don't need to decompress between roles.
No, because I think, I don't know how I work, or I don't really have a process, but I try and have one eye that's an objective sense of distance, so you can kind of not manipulate the character, but be slightly mathematical about it as well as being inside it. So I don't take my work home, so to speak. My life and my work sort of exist in parallel.
Yeah.
I mean, if I find for me, if they were too intertwined, that way would lead into insanity.
Will the baby change all of this? Or some of this?
In what respect?
Well, first of all, you've already said it's a marker in a sense. I mean, the baby is 5 weeks old.
Yes.
You know, and you can see it growing and it...
Yes, it's incredible. I mean, I thought dogs grew quickly, but babies grew really quickly.
Yeah, no, puppies are dogs quickly. But there's a sense that it might, I mean, you know, you love this, you may fall so madly in love with mothering that in a sense it consumes more of your time.
Absolutely. I mean... And
therefore you have less time to do as many films and to be as responsive as you are when someone says, hey, I'm making this film called The Shipping News, why don't you come? Would you do it?
Well, I mean, obviously, you know, there's a third wheel.
Yeah.
And, but Andrew and I are very sort of, we like a challenge and embrace things. And we do know a couple who had 2 children and said that they wanted a third because they felt too in command of the situation. And I sort of feel maybe Andrew and I are the same. You know, we just like that challenge.
So it just worked, yeah.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, I don't feel necessary. The reason why I love acting is because it's job by job. I don't necessarily sort of think 5 years into the future. So who knows what's
But that's why
happen.
it worked for you, probably, because you don't have some grand design as to what this is about.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can really tell when things are conceived cynically, and I don't like to work that way.
So it's just instinct and impulse.
Yeah, it is, I think, and that's I think that's what keeps things fresh. It keeps me engaged in it.
And Elizabeth, I mean, was that something that you had to do? Once you knew they were interested in, because as I remember, this is way back when we talked about Elizabeth before, I mean, it wasn't automatic. I mean, was it?
No, I remember thinking when I read the script, and I met Shaker, who I adore.
Right.
He's really bolshy. I remember thinking this will be a big ego trip for whoever does it, and I sort of put the script away. And then talking to Shaker again, I thought I really wanted to work with him. And I think at the end of the day, it's the director. Even more than the character and the story, because
or the other actors, even more than any of those.
Well, I suppose my experience first and foremost has always been that it's the director on board first, or you know, and then things follow suit that way. But you are having a conversation with that person, and you've got to want to talk to them for 3 months and know that conversation is going to get deeper and richer, or funnier, or whichever way the movie is going to go. But
what was it about Elizabeth that you hoped to, and what was it that made her? Interesting for you?
I think for me, the interesting part of the filmmaking was that the Shaker conceived of her as being incredibly different than I did. I always thought that she was someone who had a very strong sense of herself. She was destined. I mean, predestination was an enormous part of the Elizabethan hierarchy, the structure of God through down, to the peasants. And he always saw her as a naive who became worldly wise. So I think that, and he wasn't interested in the history, and I was fascinated by that. So I think what made it interesting for me was the battling of conversations that he and I had.
Now, where did you end up?
Well, with the film. But yes. I think often if you concur...
With a character shaped by two people.
Exactly. Because if you concur with the director, absolutely, I find that you only get one shade of a colour. So it's often, I'm not adverse to banging on tables and arguing with people. I think that's part of rehearsing. It's part of moving from take to take.
Do I remember that you found a letter that she had written somewhere when she was like 17 or 18? Does that make sense?
I did read some letters. She wrote a letter to her brother.
It showed a vulnerability or something.
Yes, but there was also a knowingness. She was incredibly gifted with words, and it's no coincidence that the Elizabethan age is known for its language, for the flourishment of English as we know it.
Yeah.
And I mean, Gloriana. It's got so much to do with her. And recently they did some survey in England where they were talking about monarchs in history or women in history and who were the most powerful, memorable icons, and Elizabeth came up #1 every time.
Victoria was second, or?
I don't know. I didn't read beyond that. I just saw the word Elizabeth.
You wanted to do Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Because?
Peter Jackson, first and foremost.
The director again?
Yes, absolutely.
Not the author, but the director.
Yes, because I'd read The Hobbit as a child, but I hadn't read the books.
Yeah.
My sister was obsessed with them, but I didn't get into all that fantasy stuff. I was more into the detective novels.
Yeah.
And I was Nancy Drew, as opposed to, Galadriel in my childhood. But it was Peter's work, and I find the diversity of his work and the darkness, his work with puppets and Brain Dead and he did Heavenly Creatures, and I knew that he would tease out of the stories more than just the fantasy. So it was working with him.
Do you have to make a commitment to the other films when you make a commitment? Because your character will continue.
Well, Galadriel is in a very concentrated part of the books. Yeah. And for me it was 3 weeks. So when people say, you've made 17,000 movies last year. You
say 3 weeks here, 3 weeks there.
Yeah, it is. It's much more concentrated than that, and I have no control over when they release the things. So.
Yeah, but you wanted to do this?
Yes, absolutely. I knew that it wouldn't be done again, and in the way that they were doing it, they were shooting all of them at the one time. They shot for 18 months.
All right. Roll tape. This is a scene from Lord of the Rings.
Will you look into the mirror?
What will I see?
Even the wisest cannot tell, for the mirror shows many things. Things that were, things that are, and some things that have not yet come to pass.
You had not seen that?
No,
and you said they slowed it down, meaning?
I think he was talking about, Peter was talking about slowing the tape down to give it that sort of weird quality. But I was giving birth. I didn't get to see the film. I haven't seen it yet. I'm dying to.
What's next? Are you going to for you?
Apart from raising a son.
Yeah, raising a son. 7-pound. How much does he weigh now? He's born at.
I don't know. I haven't weighed him. Yeah. He's eating a lot though.
Yeah.
What's next? I'm working with Joel Schumacher on a film about Veronica Guerin.
Who was the
Irish journalist
who was assassinated.
Yes, in '96. So that's an enormous responsibility because the family's still alive. They're very much involved in the project, and I've played sort of people who've been dead, but when the family's alive, it's a very tricky thing, and it's she has become iconic in Ireland. I mean, in journalistic circles around the world.
Certainly. And how will you get ready for it?
I don't know. I'm watching obviously a lot of her interviews she gave and reading all her articles. I don't know. I think I'll start with maybe her voice. Yeah. I don't know.
But because it reminds me, for Charlotte Gray, you went to Scotland.
Yeah.
And you sort of hung out for 3 or 4 days and listened to radio and.
Yeah, I just drove around.
Did you get a feeling because she was Scottish?
Yes, I just would feel a bit like a fraud if I hadn't even been there. I'd been to sort of Edinburgh for a day or 2 for the festival, but I think part of it was to clear my head. I went for 4 days just by myself and bought a lot of cashmere, had a few pints and, and listened to some radio programs about air crashes. So, it's very abstract. I think it's often the isolation.
What's interesting about you is that in addition to talent, which you have worked at and which you have honed and which you have had an extraordinary range of experiences, all of which contributes to it, there is also something about you that you had nothing to do with, I don't think, except maintenance. Your appearance. Because directors, I understand why this would be off-putting. The directors talk about your appearance, in a sense of, they just see something that's magical to them. They do.
I know Mike Newell referred to me as being horse-faced.
Yeah, well, that would be it. But I also think that the director of Elizabeth talked about, you know, it seems like you could, you could inhabit 400 years.
Well, the performances that I admire are ones which are, rather than masking up, it's demasking. And I'm certainly not averse to becoming what is deemed as being ugly. And I think it's part of losing your self-consciousness. You do try and reveal, you know, the peeling away of layers of skin.
Do you fear anything?
Do I fear anything? Yeah, absolutely. So much so I'm not going to tell you what they are, my fears.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. But I mean, what I do love about acting is it has to be fearless. You know, you have to embrace the
uncharted seas.
Yeah, and the right to fall flat in your face. And it's walking that tightrope that is electrifying. You know, it's take to take. You think, God, that was embarrassing. And they're normally the moments that end up in the film. Now, I remember there's a scene that people talk about in Elizabeth where she's addressing Parliament and Shaker shot it off in 15 minutes at the end of the day, and I was furious. I said, we can't put this in the film, and I thought this is really embarrassing. And of course he loved that moment, and that's what he put in, and I can't stand to watch it.
Why? Now see, here you go. I mean, there you were out there, not prepared, not ready, perhaps.
But obviously...
You didn't have time to think about it, and yet...
No. But they're good. I think it's often you can think too much. And if you thought about everything, you wouldn't do it. And that's why I suppose I make the decisions as an actor to do various different roles. I don't think about it too much.
Why did you not want this talk before Parliament to be included?
Oh,
or why were you worried about it being in the film, saying you possibly can't use this in the film?
Oh, no. I thought it was an interesting juxtaposition that Shaker was playing with.
Yeah.
And so I was all for that. But he wanted me, you know, saying, oh, just improvise some Elizabethan dialogue. And I said, I can't improvise Elizabethan dialogue. She's one of the most articulate women in history. Yeah. I said, I had this book of all her letters, and we fought enormously over it. And in the end, you know, I said, okay, I'll do what I can. And I think what comes across is partly my frustration at trying to do that.
But you like it.
What,
that scene?
No.
Even today, you don't like it.
Well, I've only seen the film once, and that's because I was forced to sit through it at Venice, because I was told it was impolite to
Why
leave.
have you only seen it once?
It's not... I don't find it useful as an actor to...
Watch your work?
No. I think I find it... What is most educational for me is to watch rushes of other actors, if they permit you to do that. Because you know the experience of what went on the day, and then you see how it translates to the screen. It's great to know what world you're in. But to sit there and critique my own performance is a futile exercise, because it's completely impossible to be that objective. And it's not... I don't do it for me. You know, it's not... You've got to give it over to the director, to the crew, and then ultimately to the audience.
So you and Andrew have never sat at home and said, hey, honey, let's watch Elizabeth tonight.
No, and I'm not
Never.
No, I'm not going to be one of these mums who says, come on, Dash, come and watch Mummy's movies.
Forget that. Now, why did you name this kid Dashel?
We had a name for a girl, but we didn't have any. We had about 3 names for a boy, and we thought, we'll wait till... We didn't know what sex it was. It was. He was.
You didn't want to know?
No, I don't know.
You described it as it for a long time, now.
No, I don't know what we called it.
Right.
Yeah.
But anyway, so why it turned out to be a boy, and so the name was Dashel? Because
Yes.
Dashiell Hammett or Dashiell something else?
We like the sound of the name, and then of course,
I do too, yeah, that's a good name.
Yeah, Maltese Falcon.
Yeah. Much success. Thank you for coming.
Pleasure, thank you.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you. Cate Blanchett starring in Charlotte Gray, Lord of the Rings, Shipping News, nominated for Bandits. I'm forgetting things. It's a pleasure to have her on this program, and I thank her for coming. And we thank you for watching. See you next time.